Hello and welcome everyone. This is our ninth global conversation on living and learning empathy in COVID-19. This week, we look at empathy and ensuring the health and well-being of youth during the pandemic. Again, this is a joint effort between UNESCO, National University of Ireland Galway, Penn State, and the Life Course Institute at NUI Galway. I'm Mark Brennan, and I'm a UNESCO chair from Penn State. And today I'll be co-moderating with my fellow UNESCO chair, Professor Pat Dolan from NUI Galway. And we've a wonderful group of people to talk today about a whole range of issues. Again, the global response to these discussions has just been massive. And people are taking the conversations to heart and applying empathy in their lives and in their communities. So thank all of you who are watching and for our panelists this week, and for all of you that are applying and using empathy in your home places. Thank you for doing that. As with other weeks, please feel free to ask questions through Facebook or email them to us. Please feel free to be engaged in any way you like. And if you can't get in touch with us, please keep in touch through email or our websites, and we can keep these conversations going, and we can also share some of the information and resources that people are talking about. So today, as we look at the health and well-being of children and youth and how they've been affected by COVID-19, and we're also going to learn about some amazing work that's being done to address this issue, but also to support youth and provide new opportunities for them in the context of this. So we have a very full panel today. We got 6 amazing panelists with lots to talk about. So maybe what we can do is we'll jump right in. And first person I'd like to introduce is Maria Prieto. Maria is a senior youth specialist in the social and human science sector at UNESCO headquarters. She oversees a wide range of youth development programs, and research, and outreach, and an amazing amount of things. And today she's going to tell us about some global work that's going on to address youth in the context of COVID, and how we can engage youth to be active participants in it. So with that, I'll hand over to Maria, and you can tell us a bit about your work. While we're getting Maria connected there, the sound went out. Maybe what I can do is briefly, we'll just change the order a little bit. Let me hand over to Pat Dolan for a second, and he can introduce Sarah Ann Buckley, who's our next speaker, who provides some really interesting context to the issues facing children and youth during times of pandemic.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening. It might seem a bit unusual to, in a session where we're looking at the issues for youth, to think about the life course and in terms of people who are now older in life, but of course they were youth. And in particular, we're going to discuss a population of adults who in their childhood had the experience of extreme adversity. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Sarah Ann Buckley, who's a close colleague in the School of History here in NUI Galway, and also a senior research fellow at the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre. And Sarah Ann has a long track record in looking at issues of social history and children. In particular, Sarah Ann has been very heavily involved and a lead researcher on the Tuam Mother and Babies Home scandal. So it's a pleasure to introduce Sarah Ann. And the first question I'd like to ask you, Sarah Ann, is, the Tuam Mother and Babies Scandal Home has rightfully become a major issue, horrific as it was, a major issue in civic society in Ireland, and at last is getting the attention for the social injustice that it is. Can you share with us a little bit about the Oral History Project and your work on the project?
Yeah, thanks very much, Pat and Mark, for having me. So, as some people may know, the Tuam Mother and Baby Home, as it was known, or as we'd like to use the term institution, operated in the 20th century. And in 2014, Catherine Corliss revealed that a number of women had gone through the home, and there was an issue particularly with the mass grave and burials. So what we've done in the university is we have an oral history project where we're interviewing survivors, but we're also interviewing their families and those in the community, and also their advocates. And I guess in regards to this webinar, one of the first things that survivors have always said to us is they want their story to be known because they want the younger people today to understand how institutions like this can be set up, how a society can live around them and operate, really, because over 190,000 women and children went through, either were born or spent a year or 2 years in Ireland's mother and baby homes or county homes in the 20th century. And it's a huge population. And in the middle of this crisis, it's also a population that's quite disconnected. So for us, the Oral History Project will be this longer record of, as someone said before, not us telling people what happened, but survivors saying how it felt and how their lives were after being in that institution.
Thanks, Maria. And then if you could talk a little to bringing us into the kind of youth context. Firstly, the first part of the question is for the survivors, how do you think the lockdown has been for them? And maybe would you share a little bit about the Youth as Researchers project that we have coming up?
Sure. So from conversations I've had with advocates and some survivors, it's actually been very difficult because a big part of the support network is actually their meetings together in groups, and that has really been taken away. And advocates have had to work, really hard and have done very well to ensure that people are well. But I think just the changes in routines, it's been a real problem. For the project, we have only done a very small number of interviews digitally or virtually, because part of the oral history, I guess, methodology for us is sitting down, having a cup of tea, getting to know one another before people share these very intimate stories. So I think this crisis has actually had a huge impact. Now, in the middle of all this, the Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Inquiry was also delayed. It was to be published in June. It's now going to be October. And that is very difficult also for survivors because it's not the first delay. It's one of many. So there's been a few really big issues on top of what other people have been addressing. The Youth as Researchers, I'm really excited because they are going to be working on materials from survivors' stories that are going to be used to, I guess, share this with younger people. And the perspective of someone who is younger and is learning this history and reading these testimonies and how they will creatively deal with this I'm just really excited for that. We also have a podcast that's coming out in the next few weeks, which we're very excited about, and we're launching a digital exhibition as well. So we're just trying to make sure that these stories are making it out there and that survivors are the ones that are telling them.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah Ann. That really is, and I know from my own involvement in the project how exciting this will be and is, and how important it is. I'm going to hand back over to Mark now. Hopefully, I think Maria is back on board. Mark?
Yep, thanks. I think Maria is back with us, so we can connect back with her. Maria, where we left off was we were asking you to tell us a bit about the UNESCO global study that's underway, looking at the impacts of COVID on youth, and then how that's going to roll into some youth action projects. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this global initiative, and what do you think the global challenges have been for youth in the context of this environment, and the role that empathy has played in their lives, and all the great things you're doing?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. I hope you can hear me well now. Okay, I see. So where to start from? Let's start from the Youth as Researchers initiative first and foremost. It is essentially a global youth-led research initiative that UNESCO, in cooperation with you, Mark, and with Pat, the two most active UNESCO chairs on youth civic engagement, will be rolling out over the next 10 months. Essentially, this initiative is a response to the fact that that this crisis hit essentially, and we do not have any qualitative data about how it has been affecting young people. There has not been. It is the first time that we are confronted with this kind of a crisis, and we do not have the sufficient knowledge to understand the multiple effects that it can have on young people. Whether these are negative in the sense that they can be challenges that they are facing because of the multifaceted aspects of the crisis, or positive in the sense that through this disruption of everyday life and everyday habits, the young people, through their resilience and through their empathy as well, they are discovering new ways of activating their civic agency, not only for the benefit of their own selves and their families, but also for their communities and in the context of their communities. So this global initiative, Global Youth-Led Research Initiative, is essentially is an effort to work with young people, both as not only as research respondents, but also as active researchers. So we are going to be engaging with young people, building their capacities in conducting online research with other young people, exploring essentially the impact, how the impact of the crisis, how the crisis has affected young people in terms of 5 main areas that relate to their well-being, to their everyday lives. The first area is, of course, well-being, and this covers not only the physical well-being, but also mental well-being, social well-being, financial well-being, the different aspects of well-being that influence a young person's life, their decisions, their interactions with their families, and their interactions within their societies. The second area would be youth civic engagement, looking at how the crisis is affecting youth civic engagement, youth-led actions, how young people are hampered or encouraged by the new realities that this crisis is imposing on them to exercise their civic agency and to adapt their civic agency to the current context. The third area would be the role of technology. Again, specifically looking at how young people are leveraging ICTs, leveraging new technologies, media, in order to respond to this crisis and to also address challenges that this crisis may create for them personally. The fourth area is, of course, learning, not only in terms of the formal education system, but also in terms of continued learning and informal and non-formal learning opportunities. And the fifth area is rights, youth rights. Of course, youth rights is an area that is actually is a lens that is actually present in all the other 4 areas, but we wanted specifically to explore the impact of the crisis from a youth rights lens on the young people, because often we find that we speak about the challenges in education, in employment, in employability, in well-being, and within that we refer to specific rights, but at the same time there are specific categories of rights of young people that could potentially be challenged or at risk because of this crisis and during this crisis, as well as their capacity to claim them. So we will be, it is a global initiative. We will be working in different regions. The COVID has not hit at the same time across the world. So we will be looking at different contexts, different specificities, from Latin America to Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa, Europe, and North America, the Pacific, the Caribbean. So we are going to be looking at all these different different regions and working with young people in those regions to explore in depth how the crisis has been affecting young people. There will be teams from teams formed from young researchers. They will be working essentially online to avoid any risks for them and for the participants in the research. And we have just completed a preliminary survey that has enabled young people from more than 100 countries to contribute to kind of shaping a little bit the content of each thematic area of the initiative. And over the next week, we will be launching a call for young people to engage as researchers.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Maria. Really, really exciting work going on with UNESCO. And UNESCO has been at the forefront of dealing with a lot of the youth and community and a whole series of issues around this. So I'm sure we'll have an awful lot more to talk about in the question and answer section here. But it's been amazing work, and we've been honored to collaborate with you on that. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, somebody actually I've wanted to meet for quite a while, and it's really cool to have us together here talking. First of all, welcome to Priya Prakash. She's the founder and of the NGO, and she's the CEO of Health Set Go, an NGO that deals with physical and mental wellness for children and youth. She's been recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the 30 under 30 Asia list of change makers. She's 2019 Cisco Youth Leadership Award winner from our friends and partners at Global Citizen. So Priya, you're simply outstanding. Your work's amazing. You've done more in the last year or two than I've done in my whole career. So it's really an honor to have you here. Could you, to start off here, just tell us a bit about your work and how it got started, and in the context of that too, how has COVID shaped the health and well-being and healthy living outcomes for children and youth?
Yes, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I would just like to say that, even before COVID hit us, I think health has been a major issue in the world. And specifically when I come to India, India is the third most obese country in the world. It is the diabetes capital of the world. It is the cancer capital of the world. There are so many health issues that have been ingrained, taken as normal in the Indian culture, that when I set out to change that, it was such a mammoth task in itself to look at physical health. But then I very soon realized that mental health is equally, something that we really, really need to think about when it comes to children. And when I think about my own journey and why I started this organization, Health Set Go, I still remember when I was young child, probably in 4th or 5th grade, I remember growing up having very, very low self-esteem when I was a child, because like many children out there, I was bullied in school because of my weight. And being overweight, being a girl when you're young, it's not a very pleasant thing. Children don't treat you right. And it really took a huge toll on the way I thought about myself. And for many years, that insecurity ate at me, and I didn't know how to change myself. And I didn't realize for a long time that change had to be in my health. That the moment I started taking care of my physical health and my mental health, I would become better. But there was nobody to tell me, there was no one to guide me. And in Indian culture, as you know, we have a culture that largely revolves around food and celebration. And so even in my house, it was very acceptable. Unhealthy practices are very acceptable. And so it was so hard for me. It took me years, I would say, way past school. When I was in college, university, that's when I really took back control of my life, and I managed to break through that. I managed to change myself. I managed to make my health good to a certain point where I was confident about myself. And it was a very long journey. It's been a very long and painful journey. And it made me realize that my physical health had so much impact on my mental health, and of course, vice versa, right? And today I know that there are so many people out there who are already suffering with their own health, especially children, especially the youth. And it really struck me that never in school do we ever study about health. We always study about math, we study about physics, we study about chemistry, but such a fundamental thing as how to take care of yourself, I think it's never been taught to us. And that has been my life's mission and my work with Health Set Go, that I want to make sure that every child in India can grow up healthier, have the knowledge to take care of themselves, because I feel like if you're healthy, you can really achieve your full potential. And if you really look at now what's happened with COVID, as if health wasn't already an issue, I think with COVID, with the lockdown, all of us are facing a health crisis, whether it's I'm sure all of us have been impacted by it, especially mentally, because as one of the panelists was mentioning, that our routines have completely changed. And especially for young children today, there are so many of them sitting at home. 1.2 billion learners have been impacted by COVID. 150 countries have had school closures. And in India, I think what was also said earlier was that India was one of the countries, COVID has affected it sort of at the latter end. We closed down everything in March. And since March, there have been more than 200 million children sitting at home without access to school, education, technology, to even access e-learning. So it's been a very stressful situation, not only for children, but also for parents, for teachers. It's been very hard for everyone to suddenly start navigating the situation. So as a health organization working for students, and of course we worked very physically in schools. So when COVID hit, we were a little, confused about our role, because we said, now we suddenly have to take all our physical work that we do with schools, all the health education that we do with schools online. And so we started a couple of initiatives. We knew that a lot of students were being bogged down by e-learning, constant hours in front of the laptop or the computer, having to take online classes. And we really wanted to give them a break from online classes. And we wanted to create something online that was a health-based experience. And so about beginning of April, we started a daily series of online health-based webinars, and these weren't designed to be anyway preachy in nature or academic in nature. They were designed to be fun, and we wanted to focus on exercise, we wanted to focus on mental health, we wanted to focus on arts and crafts, music, dance, anything to get the children out of their seats and really moving and just having a great time. And ever since we started these online sessions, it's sort of spread across the country. In India, one school actually has almost 1,000 children. So we were able to reach 100,000 children, ever since we started online. We have also launched an online mental health journal, so that children can just write down every day what they are grateful for. And in development, we also have a mental health bot, because we do realize that sometimes children don't know who to ask some of the questions that are bothering them. So hopefully this bot initiative that we're coming up with will help with that as well. And parallelly, with teachers, with parents, of course, suddenly parents are the new teachers at home, right? So they are also confused how to pair kids suddenly, how to educate them, play multiple roles. And so we are doing a couple of webinars with parents and teachers on things like cyberbullying, on making sure that the children are safe online, that they are able to navigate the new realities, about how to parent in the new COVID age. So all our initiatives have been focused more so around mental health, but also to make the children active again. And hopefully this is having a good impact. We know that hopefully, in the next 2 to 3 months, schools will start transitioning to open back, and that itself is going to be a stressful situation for schools. So we are helping schools transition into opening back again, and at the same time trying to manage the balance of the students' mental and physical health at home. So this has been the entire work that we've been doing back here in India. We do hope that hopefully children across the world can have access to this, but at this point we're trying to get it to as many children in India as possible.
Thanks so much, Priya. That's incredibly important work and message, and the perspective you take on it. And I think, across the lifespan, the health implications beyond the COVID virus itself are going to be massive. The way this has disrupted our lives in so many ways. And it's incredibly important and timely what you're doing, but also at the same time, very essential to children and youth and their outcomes. we've already got a bunch of questions coming in for you, so we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes with those, but just great stuff. So what I'll do now is to keep us going here, I'm going to hand off to Pat, and he'll introduce our next speakers, and then we'll come back for some Q&A soon.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Priya. We're now going to move the conversation a little bit to look at issues of migrants, youth mentoring, and the impact of the COVID-19 on youth workers and youth themselves. And I'm delighted to introduce one of two speakers in relation to this segment of the webinar. So firstly, we're going to speak with Dr. Oscar Prieto Flores from the University in Spain, a very close colleague who has done just amazing work over the last number of years, both in relation to migration issues and in particular in work that Bernadine and I have been working with Oscar on in relation to youth mentoring. So Oscar, the first question I thought might be useful if you could just give us a general picture of your experience of COVID-19 and the community that you are working with, and I suppose specifically what COVID-19 has been like for young migrants from your knowledge and experience.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the invitation, Mark, to participate in this webinar. As you probably know, Spain has been one of the most affected countries worldwide by the virus, accordingly to official data. The Spanish government announced a national lockdown 3 months ago, and we are now going back to normal. But besides the health consequences of the virus, the lockdown is seriously hitting disadvantaged communities. What we have seen here is that the spread of the virus now, or the outbreaks, are taking place more in some communities than others. Actually, migrant communities tend to work and live more in spaces where the virus can easily spread, such as working in the meat industry, as an example, or to live in overcrowded apartments due to the high prices housing has experienced in Spain in the last decade. One of the main challenges this lockdown is having for youth migrants and their families is in the field of education. In health sciences, epidemiologists are showing how death curves in 2020 have increased against the average of those in the last years. However, we need to reflect upon early school living and the social consequences of this COVID-19 is having on the schooling of migrant children. It is urgent to think about the learning gaps this outbreak is bringing and how high will be school dropout curves due to the social and educational consequences of the virus in the years to come. So if we do not act in this sense, the cost of inaction will be high. Regarding the children, the most exposed to learning gaps are migrant and refugee ones. It will be a challenge to re-engage schooling, language acquisition for these children after 6 months without neither formal nor informal education. So it will be a big loss for all of us. Another loss we can identify among these communities and among society in general is the loss of intercultural relationship that can take place in everyday life in different settings, such as schools, after school, or community-based activities, for example. And finally, youth migrants and their families are also seriously affected by unemployment as well. For example, those stationary jobs where youth migrants could work for some hours to have a complementary salary to pay their studies are closed or making employees reductions due to the lockdown and the lack of tourists here, which is strange, very strange for us not to have tourists around in this season of the year.
Thanks, Oscar. That's really insightful, and I think reflecting on our experiences in Ireland and in other countries, I can see many similarities. But the Spanish experience in its own way, I think, has been obviously very unique for the migrant community. And not totally, but slightly switching hats to your mentoring hat and your expertise as a leading academic on youth mentoring. What do you think have been the main issues during lockdown and during COVID-19 for youth who are being mentored in terms of issues? Well, I mean, the basic issue, of course, is that they have a need for social support beyond their immediate family. So in terms of things like e-mentoring, online mentoring, or purely not having access to a mentor, what do you think has the effect on mentoring been for youth mentees and mentors in the context of COVID-19?
Yes, the situation in Spain has not been easy to manage, sincerely. Mentoring programs are tackling this situation, no? With this situation. And to put people into context, here in Spain, we are running a mentoring program with the students of several Spanish universities who are mentors of migrant students from primary and secondary schools. The idea of this program, named The Nightingale, is to help children to feel safe in the new environment, to learn how to navigate through the system, and to provide language and emotional support during this challenging time. So university students volunteer, and as a part of their service learning, they meet 3 hours once a week with their mentees in the neighborhood or in the city. The mentoring experience is developed mainly outdoors. So the lockdown caught us all off guard, actually. One of the main challenges here was how to reconnect people. It was it was not so difficult because they had been together doing activities for several months before. So the most challenging issue was to keep mentoring alive through technology. Some kids were difficult to reach, but most of the pairs have been in contact during these 3 months. So during this time, we all had to practice empathy more than ever, we can say, going beyond our own problems, personal and family situations, and thinking about others. No? One of the benefits we saw was the emotional support that mentors provided to their mentees in schooling. Besides sharing pictures, playing online games together, talking how the lockdown was affecting them and their families, or how the Ramadan was developing, for example. Mentors were helping migrant children with the adjustment to the new schooling because their parents didn't know how to help with homework and online classes. Most of them were actively involved in asking how schooling was about and how they could help with homework, with worries about their future as well as other issues. So, and the main challenge was to struggle with some people, both mentors and mentees, to stay connected, to keep up with mentoring and not get off. It was not easy in some cases, living in stressful situations or having difficulties to cope with. And we have ended up the mentoring relationships, once some of them through social distance or through distance, but some others with a kind of physical encounter, respecting the health recommendations by institutions.
Thank you very much, Oscar. There are numerous questions coming in, which hopefully we will come back to later in relation to your contribution. I'm delighted now to turn to my very close colleague, Dr. Bernardine Brady, who's lecturer at the School of Political Science and Sociology and a senior researcher at the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre. And Bernardine has been doing amazing research, not just on mentoring, but also on many areas in youth development, and currently is involved in a major study in relation to the experience in Ireland of youth and youth workers in relation to COVID-19. So Bernardine, maybe you might talk, within this slightly wider context, but not massively, about some of the issues that young people have been experiencing as a result of COVID-19, and also then a little bit about how youth workers or youth worker systems have been responding to what is really a unique and kind of unusual experience.
Thanks, Pat. It's lovely to join with such a great panel of speakers this evening. So thank you very much. And as you said, Pat, I've had the pleasure over the last few weeks of doing some research, particularly with Feroiga around their experiences of youth work during the COVID-19 lockdown and so on. Myself and Pat and our colleague Aileen as well have been doing that. And then some other organisations have also been undertaking research on this. Just today I was talking to Marie Feeney in Connemara, who had done a consultation with young people around their experiences of COVID-19 and what issues come up for young people, and also Corlin and Og Youth Council in Galway. This week I had the pleasure of talking to them about research they'd done as well. So I suppose just pulling together some of the issues that seem to be kind of common themes that are coming up around the issues that are facing young people during the time or have in the last few months. So I suppose just one thing that struck me is, compared to adults, young teenagers and young people have so many rites of passage and life events concentrated in a very short period of time. So that could be leaving primary school, saying goodbye to all your kind of primary school childhood friends, starting secondary school. It could be doing junior cert, doing leaving cert, going to college for the first time, all those kind of things. So I think there's an awful lot of teenagers or young people who've been affected by some of those, suspension of some of those rites of passage, and it's something the previous generations have not had to deal with. So I think it's very bewildering and confusing for young people, and coming to terms with that in terms of what it means for them personally and their future. Even though it's a collective experience for each young person individually, they have to come to terms with, what does this mean to me, for me? I suppose the second area that's been significant is in terms of teenagers and young people. As we all know, it's an intensely social time where you are only too delighted to get a bit more freedom to leave your family home and your parents and get out and about with your friends as much as you can. And then something like this happens and you're drawn straight back into the family home. And I suppose intensely spending lots of time with family. And I suppose all the typical social outlets like sports or youth clubs or leisure, even being able to just hang out on the streets with your friends are no longer an option. So obviously that's a significant stress and challenge for young people as well. And, you know, some of the young people in Connemara talked about just general things like boredom, not having anything to look forward to because you don't know what's going to happen during the summer or what's going to happen. So you don't really have the normal things to look forward to. And also, I suppose, anxiety maybe around how you're going to interact when all this is over. Will life be the same? And the third, I suppose, point just is around for more young people who are more vulnerable, who have, I suppose, to deal with these normative things like rites of passage being upended and not having social outlets, but then who also possibly have issues like domestic violence, with poverty and cramped living environments, who don't have access to technology for online schooling and social engagement and so on. So I think for these young people, there's particular worries and concerns around their health and well-being. So in terms of, I suppose, how youth work has responded, we've had some really, really interesting insights from the youth workers that we've spoken to over the last number of weeks. So I suppose the general sense was, for youth workers, their main work is typically face-to-face. It's all about relationships. It's about community. So I suppose in terms of not being able to do that, it poses a very significant challenge. So it definitely took them a while to get their heads around it, although they adjusted very quickly by the sounds of things, and had to kind of come up with a lot of creative solutions. So I suppose the response from social work kind of falls into two main, or from youth work, falls into two main kind of categories. The first is online engagement. So I suppose that nationally, Feroiga, for example, would have done a lot of campaigns and social media campaigns to engage young people and to support them during this time around their health and well-being. So their campaigns focused on things like mind, body and soul, and they had a various range of activities for young people that they could engage with online around those topics. At the local level then, I suppose there's been good efforts by youth workers to engage young people online via Zoom and other platforms. And a lot of young people have engaged in this way. So I suppose from talking to the youth workers, it seemed the online engagement seems to work best for groups that have a clear sense of purpose or a clear kind of topic that they're working around. So whether this is like, say, a local youth council or a national reference panel that has a clear sense of purpose and it maybe already has established working relationships, moving online is relatively easier for a group like that. But also within youth projects or clubs where they've built up relationships with young people, they, I suppose, had the social capital there to facilitate them moving online, where people knew each other already and could adjust to doing particular projects or particular groups online. So some of the themes or topics that have seemed to have worked really well are projects around food. There's an innovative project in Galway with Galway City Partnership, Healthy Ireland, where the youth workers drop off ingredients to the young person's home, and they later that evening they share a video on Zoom of the youth worker cooking a meal, and the young person cooks the meal for their family, and that has been working very well. So again, it's something they had been doing in a face-to-face format, but it has actually transferred quite well online. Other projects that have worked well online have been music, coding, transition to secondary school programs have been popular, things like film clubs and leadership programs. And like Oscar mentioned about mentoring, about 90% of matches, Big Brothers Big Sisters, have managed to continue to meet online. So that's been very positive. So I suppose, again, just going back to the more vulnerable young people, I suppose the experience was that maybe some of them didn't engage very well online and maybe didn't respond to texts or contacts or whatever. So I suppose youth workers had to go to additional efforts to engage these young people and to reach out to them. I suppose one thing they found was that young people nowadays, to make me sound like a really old person, don't tend to talk to people on the phone. They tend to text or message. So for youth workers trying to some had to actually teach the young people how to talk on the phone, in order to be able to maintain that level of communication. Or I know Foróige decided to engage in some street work where they went out on the streets and they put guidelines in place to support this work, where they went out and made contact with young people who had been involved in their services, just to check in and see how they were and to find out, I suppose, if they had any particular needs that they could help them with. So this proved to be very effective in terms of keeping them in tune with what was going on for young people, and being able to respond appropriately. So arising from that, I suppose, and other work they were doing, they were able to, I suppose, provide practical support to families with things like laptops or other forms of hardware or broadband support that they needed in order to engage. They also had an initiative that was supported by philanthropy, which was around producing resilience packs or well-being packs or care packs for young people. So the youth workers, say, who would have had a good relationship with a young person and knew what they were interested in, produced kind of tailored goodie bags or packs that they dropped off at the young people's houses. And these could have, say, motivational messages and maybe arts and crafts, or a suggested routine that the young person could follow just to keep themselves happy and so on. And apparently the feedback they got about these kind of personalized supports was incredibly positive, that people really appreciated that somebody was thinking of them and that knew what made them tick, and actually reached out to give them that support. So I suppose just to finish, youth work is all about relationships, and I suppose a lot of the youth workers would have said it has been difficult and it has been very challenging, and they would love to go back to normal face-to-face interaction. But there are a lot of things they've done during this time that they'll keep doing. You know, they've developed a lot of new insights and ideas. And you know, they're very, I suppose, anxious to get back but they're anxious to get back to face work at the same time. So that's it.
Thanks very much, Bernardine. It strikes me on listening to your presentation there that in many ways we're valuing more in terms of what youth workers do and how youth experience that themselves and their own agency in lockdown than we did before this happened, you know, just as a kind of an observation. I have a load of questions coming in here, a lot, but I'm going to hand over to Mark to start the Q&A session.
Sounds good. Thanks, Pat. I'm getting flooded with questions here as well, so it's great stuff. So there's two of them I'd like to begin with. The first one came in earlier today, believe it or not, from a longtime follower of this webinar series. And he's asked a question, I think, on nearly all the previous sessions, and he was really curious about something for today. So this one here comes from Michael in Clontarf in Dublin, and it's for Priya. And what he says is, I'm really impressed and humbled by your work. Tell us more about what motivated you to do your work. But more importantly, as a young person, you have many other priorities and a life to live. Why dedicate so much of your young life to this?
Okay, that's a very thoughtful question. I think it just takes me back to my whole journey. Why I do the work I do, I think, you know, after I went through a huge experience with my own health, I think anyone who's ever gone through a transformative experience when they have changed their health, whether it's their physical health or their mental health, they always just want to do it for someone else. And that's the first feeling I had when I remember when I was really overweight when I was a child, and then I completely worked really hard to change myself. I just looked around me, and my family members were suffering through a lot of health issues. My friends did not know how to start with their health. And the first kind of urge that I had was that I just need to help other people find what I found. And I really need to just help anyone I can help in transforming. And I still remember just going to my family and saying, you know what, we all have to change now, and we have to eat like this, and we have to stop eating junk food, and we have to start exercising. And they all looked at me as if I was somebody else. They said, no, we are not doing any of this. And that's when I realized that, you know, changing adults was going to be a very tall task, especially my family. And especially, we develop so many routines as we grow older. And it took me so long to break that, even though I probably come in the young category, that I realized that if somebody had just helped me when I was younger, if somebody had just shown me the way, I would not have had to go through so much by myself alone to try to transform my own health. I fundamentally started to believe that this has to happen at a very young age. It has to be equally important that when you grow up, as you learn how to brush your teeth, you should learn how to meditate on a daily basis or exercise on a daily basis. You should know what's on your plate. And that motivation really brought me into schools, really got me interacting with the educational institutions. And I realized that they had never even thought about this. I'm just speaking about India. I know that in other countries, probably health education is a part of school, but in India, it really wasn't. And that's what drove me to do the work that I do. And honestly, it has given me a huge sense of purpose. I think the second half of the question was, I have so many options as a young person. Why do I do what I do today? I think I can't even imagine myself doing anything else. It just really drives me when I wake up in the morning that whatever I'm doing is really helping and impacting the mental or physical health of people. And I think it's very tough, I think, which everybody will understand when you're trying to solve a big problem, when you're trying to tackle attitudes which have been there for years, especially in a country like India. It's really difficult to make people even understand the importance of health. And it's been very difficult, but every time that I sort of feel very down about it, I feel like, why am I doing this? I think I just remind myself of why I started doing this in the first place. So as a young person, I think 2020 to 2030 is called the decade of the youth. And I really want to emphasize that young people are the ones changing the world today. So in reply to this question, I think I can't imagine myself doing anything else. And I know that there are a lot of youth out there, like already been described in our panel discussion, who are doing a lot of amazing things. So I'm just a part of that movement.
Very, very inspiring and amazing things that are making a difference. And thank you for that. And thank you to Michael from Clontarf for his questions. Keep tuning in and keep asking questions. Let me ask one more quick question, and then I'll hand over to Pat. And this one's for Sarah Ann. This comes from Jackie in New York City. And what she asks is, it seems that in times of crisis and pandemic, children and youth are often ignored, mistreated, or worse. They seem to take the brunt of things, even more so than other fragile groups like the elderly. Why do you think this is the case?
Yeah, I guess it's always about having a voice or not, isn't it? So I know a big part of the history of childhood is where we can find children's voice, but I guess with something like this, it's about just highlighting it. The Museum of Childhood Ireland, we tried to do some work on that. We asked children to kind of draw or create something that, you know, recorded their feelings. I guess in some ways, for survivors who are an older group, but they're an older group that have always been very vulnerable or had different times in their life where they were very vulnerable. So I think that in some ways they are as marginalized in their lack of a voice at times. So it's all just about amplifying these voices and making sure that we're not just hearing echo chambers. We're actually and like advocates are really important, but so are putting the survivors' voices front and center. But I also think that children should probably be allowed to vote a bit younger and have a bit more of a say in all our countries. I think, you know, 18 is a bit old. I'd be advocating for lowering that as well.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. Let me hand over to Pat now. We probably have time for one or two more questions, Pat.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I have quite a few questions here. I have a question for Maria in relation to UNESCO, and it comes from Don in Sheffield in England. And Don is wondering, can you share a little bit about why youth is seen as important by UNESCO?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me well because I've had some problems earlier on. Okay. So you cannot hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. We definitely can hear you now, Maria. I think.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's an excellent question, and thanks so much for this question. Actually, why do we think young people are important? Well, first of all, I mean, you know, many people in this world say, you know, the answer that you usually hear is that young people are important because they are the future leaders, or because they are the future of their society, of our societies, and so on. And yes, it is true. Young people are all of that, but at the same time, young people are human beings. They are actors in our society. They are citizens. They are people who live and who have rights today, and they are a very particular group in our society because of the specific characteristics of the period of life that they go through. Youth is a period, you know, whichever way you look at it, youth is a period in which a human being, a person, is going through a number of transitions, and it is actually a period where one is being a young person while at the same time becoming what society calls an adult. So it is a period where young people are transitioning from education to employment. It is a period where a human being, a person, is consolidating their identity, is making choices with respect as to how to position oneself in society, how to position oneself vis-a-vis important issues that and decisions in life. So to the extent that UNESCO, one of UNESCO's main objectives is to build the defenses of peace in the minds of people. So to the extent that we have such a big and important objective, working with young people and engaging with young people, for us is crucial. It is fundamental because it is. I believe it is during that period that in a person's life that one can consolidate the can consolidate and can build aspects of one's identity and of one's behavior and the ways in which choices are made. But I hope this responds to the question.
Yep. That's great, Maria. It's a very, very comprehensive response. We're going to squeeze in two last questions, and we have something coming in about comments about hair and hairdressers and wanting to know the issues around the different countries. We're not going to go with that question. However, we are going to go with this question, which is for Bernadine, and the question comes from our good colleague Nick in Leeds. And Nick is asking the question, do you think the good things that young people have done during COVID-19 have been valued enough? He's saying that in the UK, there's been a lot of bad press towards young people. So Bernadine, do you think in civic society we are acknowledging the good things?
No, Pat, I don't think we are. I think a lot of the public discourse about young people has been quite negative, about them breaching the lockdown and different things like that. So no, and definitely I think a lot of the good civic engagement type things that young people are doing for their communities and for their families and for their neighbours are being overlooked. Even some of the consultations from Connemara there were saying that a lot of young people were actually annoyed by other people breaking the lockdown and all that kind of thing. So I think, there was an awful lot of responsibility shown. And, as I talked about, young people had a lot of sacrifices to make compared to a lot of the rest of us. So I think they deserve a lot of credit for that, which they haven't really got so far.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Bernadine. And then our last question is for you, Oscar, and it comes from the US, from Indiana, from Rob. And Rob is wondering, given the hate speech that's going around the world at the moment towards people who are living in new countries, who have migrated to new countries, and given the fact that many frontline workers who have died as a result of COVID-19 have been migrant frontline workers, do you think there will be more empathy and understanding towards people who are migrants post-COVID-19?
Yeah, possible answer is it should be. It should be. But here the situation is that migrants are not so visible in the front line, with the exception with some television news that they have decided to put migrants working in the cleaning sector of the hospitals, for example, and saying that they are part of the fight against the virus, no? But unfortunately, these images are not so general as spread, and in our society, we need to put more of these images that are reflecting the reality that we have. No, these realities are shadowed, no, and we should to work more to make them visible. But not only adult migrants, but also youth migrants who are doing a lot of. Yeah.
Indeed. Very good. Well, I think that's a very good note to finish up on. Just to say that the person who asked the question about the hair wants to know, is it because I don't have any hair that I won't ask the question? The answer is no, that's nothing to do with it. Not much empathy there. Anyway, or Mark either, sorry Mark. Yeah. Anyway, I'd like finally to thank our guests on behalf of myself and Mark to thank Sarah Ann, Berendine, Priya, Maria and Oscar very much for what I think has been a really engaging webinar. As always, I want to thank the brilliant Lorraine and Catherine, who are providing the sign language interpretation, who have to put up with the nonsense every week. And finally, a big thank you to David Brandt, who you don't see, but who in the background makes us all look beautiful. Well, me anyway. So we've 3 more webinars to come in our series. Our last webinar will be, we think, a big swan song to the series. And in the meantime, next week, our colleagues in social gerontology will be talking about intergenerational and COVID-19 for older people and issues that they have to face. So thank you again. Keep safe, keep well, and see you next week.